Before we begin, let me ask you something. If your mother was lying in a burn unit, her skin grafts failing, and the one person who could authorize her emergency surgery, your stepfather looked the surgeon in the eye and said, "How long until she's legally dead?" What would you do? My stepfather made his choice. While my mother screamed through morphine-soaked nights at Houston Methodist, he called his estate attorney before he called an ambulance. What he didn't know was that I'd hidden a camera in his study 6 months earlier, and the footage I captured would bring down a $400 million real estate dynasty in a single afternoon. My name is Harper Aldridge. I'm 28 years old. And when I found out what my stepfather did to my mother, I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I built a case so airtight that 300 of Houston's wealthiest investors watched his empire collapse live while he stood on stage in a custom Tom Ford suit, still smiling. Let me take you back to where this started. My mother, Diane Aldridge, built a commercial real estate empire from nothing. She started with one strip mall in Katy, Texas in 1998 and turned it into Aldridge Property Group, 40 commercial buildings, 200 tenants, $90 million in annual revenue. She did this while raising me alone after my biological father died in a refinery accident when I was 3. Everything she built with her hands, her instincts, and an iron will that terrified every contractor in Harris County. Then she married Victor Hale. Victor came into our lives when I was 16. Charming, silver-tongued, a former luxury car dealer who'd reinvented himself as a commercial development consultant. He drove a Porsche Cayenne and wore watches that cost more than most people's down payments. My mother, brilliant with buildings but lonely after 20 years of solo parenting, fell hard. They married within 8 months. I stood at the altar as maid of honor, watching this man promise to love and protect her, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Call it instinct. Call it growing up around predators in the Texas real estate game. I knew a man performing sincerity when I saw one. Within 2 years, Victor had maneuvered himself onto the board of Aldridge Property Group. Within 3, he was co-managing director. Within 5, he controlled the company checking accounts, the vendor relationships, and my mother's appointment calendar. He isolated her so gradually that by the time I graduated from UT Austin Law School at 24, my mother needed his permission to schedule her own doctor visits. I tried to warn her. "Mom, the quarterly reports don't add up. There's $6 million missing from the renovation fund." She'd shake her head, that sad, tired gesture she'd developed since marrying him. "Victor handles the finances now, sweetheart. I trust him. He loves me." I took a position at a Houston litigation firm, but I spent my nights reviewing every public filing connected to Aldridge Property Group. What I found made my stomach turn. Victor had created 11 shell companies, all registered in Wyoming, where ownership records are nearly untraceable. Money flowed from Aldridge Property Group into these shells for consulting services and development feasibility studies that produced no reports, no deliverables, nothing. Over 5 years, $22 million had vanished into what I later learned were offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and a gambling habit at the Bellagio that would have made a Saudi prince wince. But I couldn't prove it yet. The paper trail was deliberately fractured. Every shell company used a different registered agent. Every payment was just under the threshold that would trigger an automatic audit. Victor wasn't stupid. He was methodical. So I became more methodical. 6 months before everything happened, I installed a hidden camera in Victor's home office. Texas is a one-party consent state for recordings, and my mother, during one of her increasingly rare lucid conversations, had signed a broad security authorization for the house. She thought it was for the Ring doorbell system. It covered every room in the residence. I also made copies of every document I could access during family dinners. Victor kept his study locked, but my mother's old files were still in the garage boxes of original incorporation papers, trust documents, and the one thing Victor clearly didn't know existed, a survivorship clause in the property group's founding charter. Article 12. Section 4. In the event that the founding member becomes incapacitated, all management authority reverts to the next direct blood relative, superseding any board appointment or spousal power of attorney. Victor had restructured the board. He'd rewritten the operating agreements. But he'd never found Article 12, because it was buried in the original 1998 charter that my mother filed by hand at the Harris County Clerk's office before she could afford a lawyer. That piece of paper was my insurance policy. I locked it in a safe deposit box at a Chase branch in Midtown, next to a flash drive containing every recording from Victor's study. Then came August 14th, 2024. My mother was driving home from a property inspection in Galveston when a delivery truck ran a red light on Highway 45. The collision sent her SUV rolling into a drainage ditch. She was trapped for 40 minutes before firefighters cut her out. Second and third degree burns across 40% of her body from a fuel leak that ignited. The paramedics airlifted her to the burn unit at Houston Methodist. I got the call at 8:23 p.m. from Dr. Rachel Okafor, the head of the burn unit. Your mother is in critical condition, but she's responsive. She's asking for you. I drove 90 miles an hour down I-10. I was in her room by 9:15. She could barely speak through the pain, but she grabbed my wrist with her unburned hand and pulled me close. Don't let him take it, she whispered. Promise me. I squeezed back. I promise, Mom. Victor arrived at 11:47 p.m., almost 3.5 hours after the accident. He'd stopped at the house first. I know because the security camera in his study recorded him spending 45 minutes in there, opening the safe, reviewing documents, making 3 phone calls. The audio captured everything. His first call was to Mitchell Dreyfus, his personal attorney. Mitch, she's in the burn unit. What's the timeline on the trust transfer if she becomes incapacitated? Second call to Gerald Tan, the company's chief financial officer, a man Victor had hired himself after pushing out my mother's original accountant. Gerald, we need to accelerate the Montrose deal. If Diane's out for more than 30 days, the investors will get nervous. Move the closing to next week. Third call. This one made my blood freeze. An unknown number, later traced to a man named Yuri Petrov, a private lender operating out of a strip mall in Channelview. Yuri, I need 60 more days. She's in the hospital. The money will come through. Tell your people I'm good for it. When Victor finally walked into my mother's hospital room, he didn't kiss her. He didn't touch her hand. He looked at the monitors, then turned to Dr. Okafor. What's the worst-case scenario? Doctor. Okafor, to her credit, was clinical but kind. The burns are extensive, but your wife is conscious and cognitively intact. She'll need multiple skin graft surgeries over the next several weeks. The first one needs to happen within 72 hours. The estimated cost? It shouldn't matter, she has excellent insurance through the company, but the out-of-pocket for the experimental grafting technique we recommend would be around $340,000. Victor's jaw tightened. That's a significant expenditure for an uncertain outcome. I was sitting in the corner. He hadn't even acknowledged me. My mother's eyes were closed. But I knew she wasn't sleeping. Her heart rate monitor ticked up slightly. Dr. Okafor stared at him. Mr. Hale, without this surgery, your wife faces a high risk of sepsis. This isn't optional. What about comfort care? He asked, making her comfortable while we evaluate the situation. Dr. Okafor's expression shifted. Something hardened behind her professional composure. Your wife is 52 years old, conscious, and asking for water. We're not discussing comfort care. Victor turned to look at me for the first time. Harper, you don't need to be here. This is between me and the medical team. Actually, I said quietly, Mom asked me to be here, and I'm staying. He didn't argue. Not then. He waited until 2 a.m. when he thought I'd gone home. But I hadn't gone home. I'd gone to the nurses' station and shown them my mother's signed healthcare proxy, a document she'd signed during our last coherent conversation a month earlier, giving me equal medical decision-making authority. The head nurse, a woman named Patricia Calloway, who'd been working burn units for 20 years, read it carefully and nodded. I'll make sure this is in her chart. Around 2:30 a.m., Victor returned with Mitchell Dreyfuss and a woman I didn't recognize. She was later identified as Dr. Linda Marsh, a physician who'd lost her license in Louisiana for falsifying patient records and had been quietly reinstated in Texas after Victor donated $200,000 to a medical licensing board member's re-election campaign. I wasn't in the room, but Patricia Calloway was. And Patricia Calloway had been a nurse long enough to know when something was wrong. She stood in the corner, charting vitals, and listened. She would later provide a sworn affidavit describing every word. Mitchell Dreyfuss pulled out a tablet showing my mother's trust documents. The Aldridge family trust held $18 million, the bulk of my mother's liquid assets, separate from the property group. The trust named me as primary beneficiary, but included a provision. If my mother became permanently incapacitated and unable to manage her affairs, her spouse would assume temporary control of all trust assets for a period of up to 24 months for the purposes of maintaining family obligations. Temporary control. 24 months. That was all Victor needed. The Montrose deal, a $200 million mixed-use development that Aldridge Property Group was co-financing, closed in 6 weeks. If Victor could control the trust for just long enough to pledge my mother's $18 million as collateral, he'd secure his position in the deal, cover his debts to Yuri Petrov's people, and walk away with a management fee of approximately $15 million. All he needed was my mother to be declared incapacitated. Dr. Marsh examined my mother for 11 minutes. 11 minutes. For a patient with 40% body burns who'd been conscious and speaking 6 hours earlier. Her report, filed the next morning, stated, patient exhibits signs of severe cognitive decline consistent with traumatic brain injury, secondary to accident. Recommend evaluation for long-term incapacitation status. There was no brain injury. My mother's head CT was clean. Dr. Okafor had confirmed it twice. But Victor wasn't planning to use Dr. Okafor's assessment. 3 days later, Victor filed a petition for emergency spousal guardianship in Harris County Probate Court. The petition included Dr. Marsh's evaluation, a letter from Gerald Tan, stating that the company required immediate financial oversight due to the founder's incapacity, and a statement from Mitchell Dreyfuss, requesting expedited processing due to time-sensitive business obligations. The hearing was scheduled for September 2nd, the same day as the Montrose Development Gala, where 300 investors, city officials, and media would gather at the Hotel Grandmark downtown to celebrate the groundbreaking of Victor's crowning achievement. He planned to get guardianship in the morning and toast his success that evening. I planned something different. For 18 days, I worked in silence. During the day, I visited my mother, who was recovering better than anyone expected. Dr. Okafor described her progress as remarkable: skin grafts taking, cognitive function fully intact, pain management improving daily. My mother couldn't speak above a whisper because of the throat burns from smoke inhalation, but she could write, and write she did. On a yellow legal pad, she documented every financial irregularity she'd noticed over the past 3 years, but had been too afraid or too manipulated to question. She wrote about the shell companies, the payments to Gerald Tan's personal account, the time she found a Bellagio hotel receipt for $43,000 in Victor's suit pocket, and the night he screamed at her that she was nothing without him, and the company was his now. Every night, I reviewed the camera footage from Victor's study. I watched him and Gerald cook the books in real time. I recorded Mitchell Dreyfuss drafting backdated documents to make it look like my mother had voluntarily transferred management authority months before the accident. I captured a phone call where Victor explicitly told Yuri Petrov, "The wife's trust has $18 million. Once I get guardianship, I'll wire your people $8 million, and we're square." I took everything to Catherine Vasquez, a former federal prosecutor, who now ran the most feared white-collar crime practice in Houston. She looked at the footage, the documents, and my mother's handwritten notes, and said 3 words: "We have him." Catherine reached out to the FBI's Houston field office. Special Agent David Chen had been investigating Yuri Petrov's lending operation for 2 years. Victor's name was already on their radar. When Catherine showed Chen the footage, he authorized a formal investigation within 48 hours. We also contacted 3 independent physicians to evaluate my mother. Dr. James Whitfield from MD Anderson, Dr. Priya Nair from Baylor College of Medicine, and Dr. Susan Blackwell from Memorial Hermann. All 3 confirmed. Diane Aldridge showed no cognitive impairment whatsoever. She was alert, oriented, and fully capable of managing her own affairs. Her burns, while severe, had no neurological component. Dr. Marsh's evaluation was not just wrong, it was fabricated. By August 30th, we had 142 pages of evidence, camera footage, phone recordings, bank records showing $22 million in unauthorized transfers, sworn affidavits from Patricia Calloway and 2 other nurses, 3 independent medical evaluations, FBI confirmation of an active investigation, and 1 piece of paper that Victor had never seen. Article 12, Section 4 of the Founding Charter. The Guardianship hearing was September 2nd at 9 a.m. The Montrose Gala was that evening at 7 p.m. Victor thought he was about to become untouchable. He had no idea that Catherine Vasquez had already been in touch with 6 of the 12 Aldridge Property Group board members, the 6 my mother had originally appointed, who'd been systematically sidelined by Victor over the years. They'd been waiting for this. September 2nd. The guardianship hearing lasted 14 minutes. Judge Robert Morales, who owed nothing to Victor and everything to a 30-year reputation for fairness, reviewed Dr. Marsh's evaluation alongside the 3 independent assessments. He looked at Mitchell Dreyfus and said, "Counselor, this petition is based on a medical evaluation that directly contradicts 3 board-certified specialists. I'm not only denying this petition, I'm referring Dr. Marsh's report to the Texas Medical Board for investigation." Victor's face went white, but he recovered quickly. He'd been performing confidence his whole life. By noon, he was at the Hotel Grand Mark, personally overseeing the setup for the gala. The caterers reported that he seemed completely normal. He tasted the wine, adjusted the microphone height, and rehearsed his speech 3 times. At 6:45 p.m., I arrived at the Hotel Grand Mark, wearing my mother's vintage Chanel blazer, the one she wore to her first property closing in 1998. I carried a leather folder and walked with the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly how the next 2 hours will unfold. Victor saw me in the lobby. "Harper," he said, forcing a smile. "Glad you could make it. How's your mother?" "She sends her regards," I said. "She also sends this." I handed him a sealed envelope. He didn't open it. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, assuming it was some kind of sentimental note. It was a notice of emergency board meeting, effective immediately, signed by 7 of 12 board members. At 7:15, Victor took the stage. The ballroom was stunning crystal centerpieces, a 20-foot projection screen showing renderings of the Montrose development, 300 people in cocktail attire holding champagne flutes. The Houston Chronicle had a reporter in the second row. A Bloomberg correspondent was live tweeting. Victor launched into his presentation. "This project represents the future of Houston," he said, clicking through slides. $200 million in development. 1,200 jobs. A partnership between the finest developers in Texas and a community that deserves world-class infrastructure. He was good. I'll give him that. For 20 minutes, he was brilliant. Numbers, vision, emotion. He even choked up talking about Diane's accident, how the family was staying strong, how this project was a testament to her legacy. Her legacy, the woman he'd tried to declare incompetent 12 hours ago. At minute 22, he paused for applause and said, "Now I'd like to invite questions from our partners and investors." I raised my hand. Victor's eyes flickered with something annoyance, maybe, or the first hint of fear. "My stepdaughter, Harper," he said. "A talented young attorney. What's your question, sweetheart?" I stood up and walked toward the front of the room. "My question isn't about the Montrose project. It's about where the $22 million went." The room didn't go silent. It went vacuum sealed. 300 people held their breath at the same time. "I'm sorry?" Victor said, his television smile still holding. $22 million. Transferred from Aldridge Property Group operating accounts into 11 shell companies registered in Wyoming over the past 5 years. Companies with no employees, no offices, and no deliverables. I have the bank records. Catherine Vasquez stood up from table 9, holding a second leather folder. She didn't need to introduce herself. Half the room already knew her name and what it meant when she showed up at your event. "This is fabricated," Victor said, but his voice had shifted. The confidence was mechanical now. "Harper has been under enormous stress with her mother's condition." I clicked the presentation remote. Victor's Montrose slides disappeared. In their place, security camera footage filled the 20-foot screen. Victor, sitting in his study, on the phone with Yuri Petrov. "The wife's trust has 18 million. Once I get guardianship, I'll wire your people 8 million, and we're square." The room erupted. Chairs scraped back. The Bloomberg correspondent was already filing. 2 investors from the Montrose partnership stood up and walked toward the exit, phones pressed to their ears. "That's taken out of context," Victor shouted over the noise. "Then let's add context," I said. I clicked again. New footage. Victor and Gerald Tan, side by side at the study desk, reviewing spreadsheets, Gerald pointing at a column. "We move this through the Katie shell first, then split it between Cayman accounts. Diane won't see it. She hasn't looked at the operating ledger in 2 years." Gerald Tan, seated at table 4, stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. He grabbed his wife's arm and headed for the door. Catherine Vasquez's associate intercepted him with a subpoena before he reached the lobby. I played 2 more clips. Victor on the phone with Dr. Marsh, coaching her on what to write in the fabricated evaluation. Victor telling Mitchell Dreyfuss to backdate the management transfer documents. Each clip was under 60 seconds. Each one was a nail in the coffin. Then I addressed the room directly. "My mother, Diane Aldridge, founded this company in 1998 with a single strip mall and a vision for Houston that none of you would have invested in at the time. She built every building in this portfolio by hand. 3 days ago, while she lay in a burn unit fighting for her life, this man," I pointed at Victor, "filed a petition to have her declared mentally incompetent so he could steal her trust fund to pay gambling debts to Russian-connected lenders." I held up the founding charter. Under Article 12, Section 4 of Aldridge Property Group's founding charter, all management authority now reverts to the next direct blood relative. I am invoking that clause effective immediately. Sandra Kim, one of my mother's original board appointees, stood. "I call for an emergency vote to remove Victor Hale from all positions within Aldridge Property Group." "Seconded," said Dr. Tom Patterson, another original member. Victor grabbed the microphone. "You can't do this. This is my company." "No," I said. "It never was." The vote was 8-4. Victor was removed as co-managing director, stripped of all signing authority, and banned from company premises. The 4 who voted against were his own appointees, and 3 of them changed their votes within the hour after Catherine showed them their personal liability exposure. By 9 p.m., the FBI had arrived at Victor's home with a search warrant. They seized 3 computers, a safe containing $400,000 in cash, and financial records that would take forensic accountants 4 months to fully unravel. By 10 p.m., the Texas Medical Board had suspended Dr. Marsh's license pending investigation. By midnight, Mitchell Dreyfuss had retained his own criminal defense attorney. The Montrose deal collapsed that night. The co-financing partners withdrew within hours, citing material misrepresentation. Victor's personal assets, the Porsche, the watch collection, a vacation condo in Destin, were frozen by federal order before sunrise. I drove straight from the gala to my mother's hospital room. She was awake, watching the 11 o'clock news on the mounted TV. Her face bandaged, swollen, still healing, turned toward me when I walked in. The reporter on screen was standing outside the Hotel Grandmark. Her lips moved beneath the bandages, something that might have been a smile. She reached for her legal pad and wrote in shaky block letters, "My girl." I held her hand, the unburned one, and we watched the coverage together in silence. Victor tried to see my mother once, 4 days after the gala. Patricia Calloway stopped him at the nursing station. "Mrs. Aldridge has requested no contact with you. I have a signed directive." He stood in the hallway for 11 minutes, according to the security footage. Then he left. He never came back. Gerald Tan cooperated with the FBI within a week. His testimony confirmed everything. $22 million embezzled, funneled through shell companies into offshore accounts, and gambling debts. Victor owed $8 million to Petrov's network, and had been using company funds to make payments for 3 years. The Montrose deal wasn't just his crowning achievement, it was his escape hatch. The management fees would have covered his debts and left him clean. My mother's trust fund was Plan B. Mitchell Dreyfus was disbarred in November. Dr. Marsh lost her license permanently in December. Gerald Tan received a reduced sentence, 18 months federal, in exchange for full cooperation. Victor's criminal trial began in February 2025. Wire fraud, embezzlement, elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud. The federal prosecutors decided to pursue everything. He was convicted on all counts in April and sentenced to 12 years. I didn't attend the sentencing. I was in a conference room at Aldridge Property Group, now renamed Diane Aldridge Partners, reviewing the final audit with our new CFO. The books were clean for the first time in 5 years. My mother left the hospital in October, 3 months after the accident. The skin grafts took. The physical therapy was brutal, but she attacked it the way she attacked everything, with methodical, relentless force. By December, she was back in the office 3 days a week. By February, full-time. The first thing she did was establish the Aldridge Foundation for Burn Survivors, $5 million, to fund treatment for uninsured burn patients in Texas. The second thing she did was walk into the Harris County Clerk's office and file for divorce. It was finalized in March. Victor signed the papers from federal prison. Under Texas community property law, he was entitled to half of the marital assets, but the fraud forfeiture clause in his prenuptial agreement, which he'd signed carelessly, assuming my mother's money would always be his to spend, left him with nothing. His attorney argued for leniency. The judge looked at the evidence and said, "Mr. Hale entered this marriage as a predator and operated as one throughout. The court finds no basis for equitable distribution. My mother got everything, every building, every account, every contract." Victor wrote to me once from prison. A single page, handwritten. He said he was sorry. He said he never meant to hurt Diane. He said the gambling got out of control, and he made choices he couldn't take back. I didn't write back. Apologies from prison cells are just another performance from men who spent their whole lives performing. Patricia Calloway, the nurse who witnessed everything and risked her career to provide testimony, received the Texas Nurses Association's Courage in Practice Award. She cried when they handed it to her. "It's not courage," she said. "It's just doing what you're supposed to do when someone's being hurt." Dr. Okafor was promoted to Chief of Surgery at Houston Methodist. She implemented a new protocol requiring independent third-party review of any incapacitation filing made within 30 days of a patient's admission. 3 Texas hospitals adopted the protocol by year-end. The state legislature began drafting what the Houston Chronicle called the Aldridge Rule: mandatory waiting periods and independent evaluations before any guardianship petition can be filed for hospitalized patients. The foundation funded its first 12 patients within 6 months. A 4-year-old girl named Sophia, who'd been burned in an apartment fire her family's insurance had lapsed 2 weeks before. A retired welder named Harold, whose employer provided coverage, denied experimental grafting as cosmetic. A 19-year-old college student named Marcus, who'd been told by his hospital's financial office that his burns weren't severe enough to justify the cost of treatment. He had burns on 30% of his body. Every one of them recovered. Every one of them walked out of the hospital because someone decided their life was worth more than a line item on a budget. My mother keeps their photos on her office wall now, next to the original property deed for that strip mall in Katy. She says they remind her why she built the company in the first place. Not for the money. For the leverage money gives you to protect people who can't protect themselves. I still practice law. I left the litigation firm and opened my own practice, Aldridge Legal Advocacy, specializing in guardianship fraud and medical financial abuse. My first case was an 87-year-old woman in Beaumont, whose grandson had filed for guardianship while she was sedated after a hip replacement. He wanted to sell her house to cover his cryptocurrency losses. We won. Her house is still hers. Her grandson is serving 2 years. People ask me if I've forgiven Victor. The answer is no. Forgiveness requires honesty, and Victor was never honest about anything except his ambition. People also ask if I feel sorry for him. 12 years in federal prison. No money, no family, no legacy except a cautionary tale. I don't feel sorry for him either. I save my sympathy for the people he would have destroyed if I hadn't been watching. For my mother, who trusted a man who saw her as nothing but a balance sheet. For every patient lying in a hospital bed right now, while someone in a suit calculates whether their life is worth the expense. My mother told me something last month, sitting in her office, the Galveston sun coming through the window and catching the scars on her arms. She said, "He thought the buildings were the empire, but the empire was always you." I keep that close. Not because it makes me feel powerful, because it reminds me that the people who try to take everything from you always underestimate the one thing they can't steal, the part of you that refuses to let them win. Thank you for witnessing this story. If you've survived betrayal from someone who was supposed to protect you, know that evidence beats emotion, preparation beats confrontation, and the right moment chosen carefully can bring down anyone. Subscribe for more stories of justice being served. Share this with someone who needs to know they can fight back. And remember, document everything.